Hello, I'm Warren Moyer, an agronomist at the Futrell Company. Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to be discussing plant tissue sampling and its importance to you as a grower and a producer. First, we want to look at a few basic concepts as to why you should consider plant tissue sampling for your operation. Why is plant tissue sampling used? What do you gain from this? We're going to also discuss how often to tissue sample, which is going to be mostly in relation to time of growth cycle and the frequency of which sampling should be done on various plants. Also, we'll discuss how to understand the results. And lastly, a baseline for how you can use this information to improve your crops and profitability on your farm operation. So why should you plant tissue sample for your farm? The answer, there's various reasons for these answers, but tissue sampling alone is not a sufficient window into soil and crop needs. It's a tool that you can use to be combined with soil testing and further management strategies, which together can help to provide you a clear picture of what the plant's receiving versus what you're actually putting on the soil. Tissue sampling is going to allow you as a grower to stay well ahead of nutrient demands and curves as a crop matures and begins production for the intended crop. It's going to allow you to avoid nutrient deficiencies by realizing them potentially before they cause yield loss or crop performance drags. One other issue that we often see in production ag is too much visual guessing made by producers. Although this can be an acceptable tool, depending on the circumstances, oftentimes visual guessing can lead to over-applying nutrients, under-applying nutrients, or application of the wrong nutrients when they're not really what the plant needs. Often we see this in high-value crops where a grower might make a guess or an assumption that is low in one nutrient by visual appearance, but further looking or further investigation through tissue sampling can show them that although maybe they were low in that nutrient, they might also be low in another nutrient as well, allowing them to make the appropriate applications and correct the deficiencies. Of course, by staying ahead of these issues, you're going to see overall improved crop performance, and overall improved crop performance will generally lead to improved yields and healthier plants. As we said before, plant tissue sampling by itself and in and of itself is not the single answer to fertility questions on a crop, but it can be part of a comprehensive management plan that will better your yields. Oftentimes growers ask, how often should I sample? That depends a lot on the crop you're growing. Higher value crops, a grower should consider more frequent sampling, such as vegetables and fruit trees. Corn and soybeans or row crops, forage crops, we would tend to sample less, although some growers still prefer to sample them fairly frequently. The frequency at which you sample your crop is a little bit of your own decision, depending on how tightly you want to manage. But below, we're going to cover a few basic principles that should be followed regardless of how often you sample. Firstly, you always want to pull samples at a consistently during the week and during the time of the day. This is important for several reasons. As the sun rises and sets and at higher photosynthesis levels during portions of the day, nutrient levels will fluctuate. So as an example, if you pull your sample at 9 a.m. one week and 2 weeks later you pull a sample at 7 p.m., those samples could not be comparatively as accurate as they should be. Although there's not drastic differences, there are certainly differences throughout the day. So we always want to try to pull samples at a consistent time of day. Also, it's generally wise to get a program or a schedule in mind ahead of time so you have an idea how you want to do your sampling on that crop. Below are listed two different options. Some growers will choose to sample weekly or bi-weekly, basically from the time of crop emergence or transplanting until the end of the productive season, or the end of the season in which they could alter it through fertigation or fertilizer additions. So with that being said, they might, on corn, they might opt to pull tissue samples basically from emergence right on up until tassel. And of course, we can extrapolate that into any crops as far as vegetables or anything else. A second option for sampling schedule would be to pull samples ahead of important growth periods. An example of this would be if we were talking about tomatoes, we would pull samples basically weekly or bi-weekly, but we would only start pulling them right around the first flower set. Basically, when that plant's starting to enter into a stress load period, we're going to start pulling samples, and we're going to pull samples essentially ahead of every fruit set to make sure that our nutrition levels are adequate as that plant enters those fruit set periods. So two different options there. You can cater these to suit your own needs for your own farm or operation, but definitely keep it consistent, keep it same time of day. So properly pulling samples, this is important. Whatever lab you use, they will provide you, or should provide you, with a sheet that will indicate how to pull the samples, and also the number of leaves or plant parts that they want, and the maturity of the plant parts that they want. So these are some important key pointers here. You need to pull and sample the proper plant parts because the lab is going to analyze them based on the assumption that you pulled the parts they want. Nutrient levels will vary within a plant based on plant tissue maturity. So older leaves will have a much different nutrient assay than a younger plant leaf. So, and we'll look at that in another slide or two here as to how the lab views that. Again, we're going to pull samples at the same time every day. Also, although we do want to try to select plants at random, we don't want to try to pick healthy plants. We don't want to try to necessarily pick the worst plants if we're trying to get an overall picture of what our crop looks like. But it is also important not to pull samples, if you can avoid it, from drought-stressed plants or insect-affected plants. Generally, plants that are under a great stress load will show altered nutrient levels because they are not photosynthesizing properly, therefore they are not processing nutrients properly. If sampling is plants close to the ground, you also want to make sure you don't have dirt on the leaves from rain splash. This is a pretty common problem, and it can alter the tissue analysis, basically because the dirt's mineral, you're going to have mineral content in the dirt, and it's going to create an issue where you could have some altered mineral results in your tissue sample. So definitely, if you do have to sample plant tissue that's close to the ground, be sure to try to brush off well any dirt that's there. I always suggest to growers to typically pull samples early in the week. Monday morning's a great time. It's the start of the week. You can get out there, pull a sample first thing Monday morning, get it right in the mail, right to the lab, and the lab will be open when the sample gets there 2 days later, and everything's good to go. You'll have the results back before the end of the week, or you should, and you can make management decisions based on that sample in that same week. If you wait until Thursday to pull a sample, the lab gets it, it's almost a weekend. Do they get it in time? Do they not? Can create some issues with lag time and mailing, things like that. Of course, as with any sampling, keep everything as clean as possible. So here's an example. This is just to give you an idea. Of course, this list is very long depending on the crop, but you can see how these are all lettuce crops, but you can see the difference in the leaves that the lab is looking for. They're looking for fully developed, on Boston lettuce, 8-leaf stage. So basically, an immature, not a harvest stage. They're looking for the oldest leaf. That's it. They want 12 of the oldest leaves. Same lettuce plant, but a mature, they want the most recent fully developed leaves. So they don't want the oldest leaves. They want the leaves that are most fully developed, but just recently developed, and they want 20 of them. If we jump over to iceberg lettuce, again, it's going to change. The point here is we need to follow the protocol that the lab sets ahead for you, and make sure that you're providing them with the accurate sample so that you can get accurate results back. Here's an example of a tissue test results and what yours might look like. This will vary depending on which lab you use, but they're all relatively close to the same. Most of them offer a bar chart or something of the sort like this. Although these are fairly accurate, they can be a little bit misleading sometimes, but definitely important to look at. So here, if you look at this, we can see here that, of course, nitrogen is at 2.5%. They're saying, so these are on high tunnel tomatoes grown. I'm not sure what their growth stage was on these. I think this is probably fairly young. But we can see here that nitrogen's running low, sulfur is very good, phosphorus is on the low side. Of course, potassium is very low. Usually on tomatoes at young growth stage, we want potassium to be in excess of 3.5. So we can get a little bit of a picture here what's going on. Calcium levels are very good. Zinc levels are low. I always suggest that you take results and take them to an agronomist and have them help you look them over. Although they are fairly self-explanatory, it doesn't hurt to get a second opinion on reading them and helping to interpret them. So as we just reviewed the results sheet above, it's always good to make sure that you're understanding the results correctly before you're making fertilizer amendment decisions. Another thing to keep in mind, sometimes they can be a little misleading because nutrient imbalances or excess in one nutrient can lead to a deficiency in another nutrient, essentially. So simply adding more of a nutrient that might show up low is not necessarily the way to correct that. And that's why it's often good to get the results, take them to an agronomist that you trust or you're comfortable with, and let them make suggestions and help you understand them. So we took the tissue samples, we sent them out, we got the results back. You talked to an agronomist, you guys talked it over, you have an idea where you want to go. How do we take these numbers from a sheet of paper, and how do you take that to making field decisions that are going to be profitable for you and are going to help benefit your crops, both yield and health? So here again, an agronomist is going to be able to help you make these specific definitions or decisions based on corrective products or where you might go, application rates, application methods, all types of things like that. Depending on the stage of growth, it can be acceptable for a crop to be, or depending on the stage of growth, you might expect the crop to be low in certain nutrients. So adding more of them may not be necessary. Typically, with this type of a testing situation, we're usually looking at, on vegetables, drip or foliar feeding. You might, foliar feed nutrients to apply them to target specific deficiencies within those crops. So in closing, plant tissue sampling is a tool. It's a tool that's probably underused by a lot of producers. It does not take long. It is relatively low cost and certainly can provide you with a real window into where your crop's nutrition content is in the foliage, and can definitely help you stay ahead of some plant growth demands prior to the plant really running out of them. It can help you to limit deficiencies, and certainly it's something that I think almost everyone should consider on their operation, especially for the cost that it has. If there's questions or comments, please feel free to post them below. I hope you enjoyed this video. We will be posting more in the future. Thanks.